We're pleased to this discussion as part of MENA 2050's work on shaping a forward-looking regional vision for the MENA region, particularly in light of the political, security, and humanitarian transformations unfolding in the region. And today's session is grounded in the work of the Regional Vision Team, which is a group of scholars, practitioners, and policy experts brought together to reflect on post-conflict scenarios for the region, what risks and opportunities lie ahead, and how regional and international actors can engage more constructively. So the research note to be discussed today explores and asks the question of, can economic integration serve as a viable pathway to peace in the MENA region? And many leading policymakers within the region and out of it have long promoted economic integration as a means of reducing violent conflict within the region. And so these arguments are often accompanied by comparisons to the EU, where economic integration was used as a central mechanism to promote peace after conflict. So to help us unpack these critical issues, we have two distinguished panelists, Dr. Ahmed Khuzaie, who is the managing director of the U.S. Council on Gulf Affairs in Washington, D.C., and founder of Khuzaie Associates. He is also a member of the International Profession of Political Consultants and brings extensive experience in Gulf Affairs and strategy. And we also have Dr. Cinzia, who is a senior analyst and advisor specializing in the Arabian Peninsula and Gulf security, and she's a researcher at the European Council on Foreign Relations. So thank you both for joining us today. I'd actually first like to start by asking you, Dr. Cinzia, on the European Union's experience with economic integration and some of its objectives and political underpinnings. Over to you.
Thank you, Noora, and let me thank you first and foremost, MENA 2050, for this invitation and the opportunity to discuss such a topic, which I think, we've heard over and over, this idea that the Middle East should, in one way or another, follow the European model of economic integration as conducive to peace among different nations. And I think we never sort of properly have the opportunity to unpack it. So I think this is a great opportunity that we have today. So to come to your question, Noora, I think the first thing I would do is we have to contextualize how did the European model begin? It began in a context of utter destruction after the Second World War. And the idea that suddenly, because sort of one side was being effectively defeated, then there was a sort of a shared understanding and alignment from a geopolitical point of view. So these were the two conditions. There was utter destruction, which resulted in an extreme fatigue at confrontation and conflict and sort of rivalries. And on the other hand, you had a situation of de facto geopolitical alignment because one side had obviously lost the war and the other side was victorious. So these two conditions sort of were the enablers. And what happened was the idea that to rebuild after a war of that level, you couldn't really do it alone. So there was the urgency to sort of unite and pool, in a way, sort of create positive paths of dependencies that would reinforce each other's competitive advantages in a way, and also translate that de facto geopolitical alignment into something more permanent and solid, which would rest upon shared interests. And these are the basic premises of the European model. And it is not by chance that the first thing they did was to create a community around coal, which was at the time the most important resource for its sort of energy production and manufacturing, which in turn was the other thing that was absolutely necessary, manufacturing on a large scale and very heavy industries to rebuild upon the rubbles of war. So I think, so let's leave it at that by saying what were the key premises and what was the sort of first step, which was head on sharing the most important resources that were at the time.
Right. Thank you for that answer. I'll hand divert it over to Dr. Ahmed to ask on his views regarding economic integration and how relevant this framework is for the MENA region today.
Thank you. I'll walk on the footsteps of Dr. Bianco here, since he started untangling the historical view of how the European Union started, actually. Taking from there, we look at the Gulf background or the Gulf historical factor, which is the wars factor. The European Union was born after the struggle between the European countries, which is not valid for our case in the Gulf. That being said, we have to appreciate that any economic integration has long been viewed as a pathway to stability. What kind of stability are we looking for? We have to identify what does the Gulf require, what's the need, hence how we're going to fulfill that need. That being said, any integration requires some background work. And untangling that with historical facts is basically the first step. And then we move into today's modern issues and modern needs, for example. If we look today at the surrounding countries or the surrounding region, basically, if we're talking about the Middle East as a whole, we look at where all the fireworks are happening around the world. Destability, we're talking about the Gulf being the only somehow semi-stable or up to a further level, very stable compared to the other nations surrounding it. That being said, now we have to talk about what's required. For example, if we're talking about the oil-rich countries that we are, how long will that last? And how long we want that to last, which many countries adapted, like the UAE, like Qatar, Bahrain, and the rest of the countries. And from there, what are the alternatives to oil? What is it like service-based industries? Are we talking about banking? We're talking about manufacturing? We're talking about assembly lines? It's a lot, but it is the right way to do it. Before ending my note, I would like to highlight one thing. Since the GCC was established, I see many people trying to say that, yeah, it took a long time, it's long overdue, we have to do it today, which is not an easy thing to do. Even the European Union took longer than people thought. So we need time to adapt, we need time to understand, we need time even for our states, as states, to flourish first and to have its own, what can I say, its own running system. Because compared to the other countries of the world, we are systematically new. So we needed to have some trial and error. We needed to have our own time, basically, to see what works and what doesn't, so we could take it forward.
Thank you for that answer. So I'll start by asking a question and I'll open it up to both of you to just kind of discuss it, which is the first proposed mechanism is that when economies integrate, that creates kind of like a shared interest in avoiding violent conflict because violence, disrupts commerce and trade and all of that. But for example, two countries that trade a lot will suffer a lot more from a war than two countries that have no economic relations. Do you think that this is plausible in the case of MENA countries? So, to what extent can integration be stabilizing, and under what conditions might it be instead destabilizing, especially when it comes to political alignment that is weak or absent? I think, Dr. Ahmed, you've covered and touched on some points related to that.
Sure, I'll start with that, if that's okay. Any integration will mean that every participating country within that framework basically will make some and lose some. Let's talk about the European Union, for example. Part of what happened to the European Union is that, for example, Germany saw that they could let go of some of its car manufacturing industry and open or reopen these facilities in less fortunate countries like it was Poland, I think it was Spain. so that Germany could focus on natural kind of industries like agriculture and all that, while giving the other countries some chance for surviving. When that happened, Germany has shut down some factories. Some of them, I remember the one in Volksburg for Volkswagen, basically used to employ around 50,000 employees under one roof. So, yes, of course, you would lose some by that, but you would divert those people into other industries, and after a while, it will build up. Same thing for Poland. Poland was, prior to the year 2000, was in a different state as it is today. So, progression requires some sacrifices for some, and the others basically will benefit on the short run, but later on, you'll see everybody leveling up. Same thing. If we're talking about the same thing here today in the Gulf, some people have to sacrifice. So it doesn't mean an integration means direct benefits. It means that you will have to endure in order for you to sustain later on.
Thank you for that, Dr. Bianco.
I think, as Dr. Ahmed expertly talked about the European case, let me touch a little bit on your question in the Gulf context, because what you said, Noora, is very true in the sense that interdependence can also be weaponized. You have to, if there is no strong political incentive to, and also like if the interdependence is imbalanced, then it can be weaponized for political purposes. I mean, we have seen in 2017 during the Qatar crisis that the fact that Qatar depended on the border for its own sustenance on, the level of food security and so on, that was a tool for the other countries to pressure Qatar to sort of correct the ways of its policies, because they felt that the policies embraced by Qatar posed in turn a threat to their own priorities. And so there was a situation by which the neighbors were seeing each other, were seeing one of them as a threatening actor, and were using the dependencies as act of pressure to sort of correct the ways. Which is very normal in the context of, a rivalry and divergences of threat perceptions, just like we saw in 2017. That said, this was one episode, which of course does not negate a history of decades of economic integration among the GCC countries that at other times served as a unifier. So my point here is that interdependence can go both ways. It can disincentivize conflict. It can also become a tool if you have special circumstances by which you have real conflict in a way, or deep divergences, unless this interdependence becomes existential. So again, briefly, with reference to the European context, take a country like Italy. For Italy, it is unthinkable to turn against, in a serious way, to turn against any of its European neighbors, because the Italian economy literally depends on export to other EU countries. So if you shut the borders, you are basically committing sort of economic suicide. So, if it becomes that level of entrenchment, then yes, it can only go one way, which is you must find a way, always a peaceful solution to any conflict.
Thank you. So the next question is, so experts point to economic and political asymmetries in the MENA region that can undercut trust. What kind of examples do you have of asymmetries in terms of economic, military, institutional that are present and that present, the most serious obstacles to integration, if you can think of any?
Is this to me or Dr. Ahmed?
Open to
Okay,
any.
so
You go
I'll,
ahead,
I'll get it.
doctor.
I'll get a quick stab at it. I think, when what I was mentioning before is, if you have these imbalanced dependencies, then yes, I mean, you have to think more carefully about whether this is a unifying factor, or this can be used as a leverage tool. And in the GCC context, the obvious example is Saudi Arabia being much bigger than the other countries. And so a much bigger market as well. So if you look at it from an economic point of view, or even that basic sort of relationship between Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, where also there is an imbalance in the energy equation between the two sides, which of course means that that one side, which is Bahrain, has to also be more careful of its positioning, because it is keenly aware of this dependency, of this sort of energy dependency. Now, as a footnote, Bahrain being small, it also has potentially other alternatives. So that, which tells you that dependencies can be, you can still diversify and de-risk, even if there are some structural imbalances in dependencies, which is, by the way, and I think we're going to go into that a little bit later, which is what the European Union is trying to do as a bloc, de-risking from a structural imbalance related to dependencies that are, very, very economic. But we will go, I think, into that.
Dr. Ahmed.
I think Dr. Bianco answered it perfectly. I have nothing to add.
Perfect. And what do we think about, for example, like the prevalence of powerful non-state actors in some parts of the region that affect, the relationship between economic integration and peace? If you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I would love to comment on that, but could you please specify what non-state actors you're referring to?
So certain groups within regions that are more powerful than the state itself.
Okay, we're talking like Yemen and Lebanon as an example. That's another issue. In order for us to eliminate these factors, we'll have to, of course, understand the reason, because for some of these proxies, they started with their grievances first, being underprivileged, being minored in their own communities. Hence, they wanted to be more powerful, and they succeeded with while being as proxies serving for another nation. In the case of Lebanon, for example, we saw what happened with the economy. It was going, I'm not going to say well, it was going by for some time until the the actors or the non-state actors started infiltrating the state itself. If you remember 3 or 4 years ago, when the Minister of Economy and the Minister of Agriculture, or sorry, Culture, as I recall, they started trashing Saudi and calling them such names. And I remember that Saudi said, fine, we'll stop. We'll stop everything. And they withdrew their advances, they withdrew their investments. And within 1 week from there, the state lost its currency. The currency was heavily devaluated. So the non-state actors, especially in today's world, over the past at least 10 to 5 years, they started to play a bigger role and a major role as well. Because of them, you started seeing their countries not being bankrupt, but even fighting wars they didn't even ask for. And we see these happening between the said countries and other countries, of course. So in order for us to overcome all of that, we have to eliminate the sources, which will take us from politics to economy, and from there even to fighting or not fighting wars. But these things would be eliminated, just like Dr. Bianco just mentioned, would be eliminated through such a body, if I may, but as well entering into that means that you will even have to endure another cost. So nothing is for free. You have to give and take in order for you to move forward.
Dr. Bianco, if you have any comments.
I think I'll defer to Dr. Ahmed's answer on this because there is, this depends on whether you look at it from a sort of a structural perspective or whether you look at it in the specific context. And we really should be sort of looking at a more detailed situation to give a more elaborate answer. And I think the one we heard from Dr. Ahmed is more than enough.
Right. Thank you both for the great answers. I think one more question would be, aside from the EU, we had stakeholders from the report reference other examples like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations as instructive. What kind of specific lessons from such alternative models could be relevant for MENA integration, do you feel? Open to both. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, this is a good question. I do think that, again, so let's go back to the European case. We started with a coal and steel community. And again, this was responding to immediate necessities, coal being the most important resource for heavy industries and steel being sort of the most important material for rebuilding. So there was a specific need for which integration made a lot of sense. And it touched upon energy, the most important energy resource at the time, and sort of a key commodity. The ASEAN model is different because it doesn't respond to the same particular context. I think it is much more about sort of complementing each other's economic necessities in a way, and also sort of pulling together market and response to also the value of alignment in a context of sort of economic pressures coming from other actors. I think the Middle East will have to sort of find its own model by picking and choosing from existing realities based on the specifics of the region. One thing that we need to, I think, address is, for example, that unlike ASEAN or the European Union, you have a situation by which a number of countries, for example, the GCC countries, have very similar economic models. They have very similar economic ambitions to the point that sometimes they are strong competitors to one another. Which doesn't negate the opportunity to build an economic community or the core of an economic community that then can be expanded to the rest of the region, of course. Also within the European Union, you have strong sort of competition on some sectors. You have duplication, and you have different countries doing the same thing. Think about the defense industry, for example. You have at least 4 countries pre-Brexit, if you count the United Kingdom, who had big defense industries, and they were doing basically the same thing, and they were competing, very, very strongly in other markets, until one point they decided to sort of, for the new and very innovative project, to sort of work together and create products that could be shared. And today you have a number of projects that are shared across defense industries in different European countries. So you can still find a way to work together, of course, even if you are sort of duplicating the economic ambitions and have the same models. But you do have to take that into account and find ways to make that sort of a win-win situation. And then after that, you're going to have to think about the wider region. And so North Africa and the Levant, and if you sort of enlarge it at that, you have other issues, which includes, the imbalances between the Gulf countries, which are very stable and wealthy and advanced, and other countries that at this time are more in need of resources or some resources, but they could obviously put other resources and advantages on the table. So again, this is a very different context from the European Union, and it's very different context from ASEAN as well. So you have to always look at the specifics of the region, I think.
You said it well. I'll just add one thing. If we compare the size and the needs and the issues that the Gulf is facing today, we can't compare them even by little to the European Union. We're talking about 61 million in population of the Gulf compared to 450 million of the European Union. So that's one big hurdle, basically, that stops the EU from advancing forward compared to the smaller population that we have. The majority of our population in the Gulf, which exceeds 50% in some countries, are migrant workers, not locals. That adapts as well to the issue. We're talking about not having a problem with fossil fuel compared to what's happening in Europe, as Dr. Bianco mentioned, with the coal, for example. That contributes heavily because of the weather. We come from a very warm environment compared to extremely cold, especially during the winter. All of these basically factors play a big role in how fast do we need to go forward in the dire need of shall we do it today or tomorrow, or how we're going to do it. As well, if you're comparing the EU, for example, they differ in the language, in the culture, in the background, and how they run their states. In the Gulf, that's almost similar. So we have lots of issues to detangle, but at the end of the day, it is a need, and I am for it, but I'm for it like taking the right steps and doing it at the right time.
Thank you, Dr. Amar. Would you like to?
Yes. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Great. So first of all, thanks very much to the speakers for sharing their insights. I have a question to both speakers, but perhaps Dr. Cinzia in particular. Europeans are a people that are very proud of their intellectual history, and it's noteworthy that the ideas, the classical liberal ideas that underlie the idea of the notion of economic integration spawning peace are associated with European thinkers like Kant and Montesquieu and David Hume. And I wonder, and European leaders throughout Europe's history are people who are well educated in the writings of these philosophers. Whereas it's fair to say that in the Middle East, modern rulers are not, perhaps very familiar with their writings, and do not feel the sense of pride in the output of someone like Kant that a German a politician made today, or maybe 50 or 60 years ago. So do you think that part of the European success in using economic integration as a means for peace comes from the intellectual pride in the genesis of these ideas, and then coming from European thinkers, or do you think that's just something that is coincidental?
Thank you, Dr. Omar. No, I mean, I think you are perfectly right in the sense that which is something that Dr. Ahmed also mentioned. I mean, we got to the European Union in a very, very incremental way. And it all started at the intellectual level with, different intellectuals from different European countries sort of gathering together and thinking in terms of how integration could be the answer to several problems. I mean, if you look at it from a political point of view, that is the famous Ventotene Manifesto, which figured intellectuals from Italy, Germany, and France, who basically met in Ventotene, this small Italian town, and had lengthy deliberations at the philosophical level, imagining European integration as the only answer to overcoming a time of dictatorship and a time of really sort of very repressive regimes under fascism and Nazism, and sort of the answer for them was integration as a way to negate the rivalries and competing interests and conflicts between different European nations. So it started from a political point of view at the philosophical level in a way. And so we sort of then use this intellectual work and teach it in every school at every level, and then sort of becomes part of the culture and the conversation. And it's always referred to as the one of the main reasons for sort of the political integration of Europe. So yeah, certainly there needs to be movement at the intellectual level to make a strong case for integration that goes beyond economic interests, because at the end of the day, especially if you look at it in today's world, which is a multipolar world, where countries have many options to prosper and follow their interests. You have to build a strong case for integration, which goes beyond sort of the naked interests, because otherwise you can argue the opposite case as easily. So I would agree that the intellectual work is absolutely fundamental.
Can I follow up on that? Yeah, I'll just add one small note to that, is that first of all, I love the question, and I love the way Dr. Bianco answered it. Just one small addition to that. Basically, the Magna Carta was introduced around 1,000 years ago. It's, I think, 1215 or something, compared to us being in our own Renaissance just recently over the past 30, 50 years. So that's a big gap. In my book, basically detangling the political state of the modern Arab world, I found out one issue, and I'll end up with that, is that politics is not the Arabic term for siyasa. The way we look at things differently. So politics is derived from the ancient Greek term of politico, which is somehow political affairs. While for us, siyasa comes from a host caretaker. So it's a person who basically cares for a group of people. There's a big difference when it comes to the fundamental understanding of what politics is, let alone how to build a state, let alone how to govern, let alone how to participate in that governance. So there is a big gap between how the West looks at it compared to how we look at it. And that's a start of where we're trying to go with this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have just a follow up on that. Do we feel that maybe democratic governance enables this or makes us sustainable, or can credible institutions and political will substitute for democracy in short or medium term?
If I may, that requires some time. As I just mentioned, our states are relatively new compared to the others. When we say democratic, there's a big collection of bouquets that we could pick and choose from. When you say democratic, there are many schools of thoughts when it comes to democracy. There are many schools of thoughts within the same schools that says how to do it and what not to. When we say we are still somehow traditional monarchies, yet the way Bahrain is governed is not the exact way Emirates is, or Kuwait is, or Saudi is, and we're still finding our ways. Because, for example, in Bahrain in 2002, when the parliament was somehow reopened since it was shut down from 75, we had a gap in between that we still need to learn and educate the population. It takes time. So we are taking where we left off. The definition of politics, basically, if you talk to somebody with a religious Muslim background, either Shiite or Sunnite, then you're talking about something completely different. They To them, democracy is for them to voice their concerns and then leave it to the leader to do it. While the classical understanding of a democracy is government for the people, by the people. God is not involved in that. So people are making their own forms of democracy as they go, us included. How long will it take? What will it take? And where we're going from here? I don't know. It's really not easy to answer that.
Thank you both. Just one final questions before we open it up to the audience for a Q&A. And please feel free to put your questions in the chat. So beyond governments, what do you feel what role can civil society and private business networks play in building the social foundations necessary for durable economic cooperation?
Noora, can you repeat the question again because you cut out for a second?
Sure, of course. Beyond governments, what role do you feel civil society and private business networks play in building the social foundations necessary for durable economic cooperation?
I think an outsized role, especially if you look at the business community. To have real integration or to have sort of real deep cooperation, you have to rely on existing business interests that can push political will along if needed. So I think in particular, when you have a de facto integration, because business communities across borders sort of find ways to integrate and be complementary, I believe that it is a fundamental input that pushes economic integration along.
Since the doctor spoke about the private sector, I'll talk about the civil society. We have a problem because whenever we say civil society, it's not identical in each of the countries within the Gulf, especially, or the wider Middle East. So, for example, political parties are not allowed in all of the Gulf, except for Bahrain, where we call them political societies because they don't elect a government. So either they are political somehow actors or otherwise, if they are in fields of business, enabling children and women, youth, businesses, they have to serve as actors. So we have to go to the foundation level for these entities. Do they understand what they're doing? Do they have the right goals? Do they have the right know-how? Because we still are at the beginning of all of that. And when I say at the beginning, I'm talking about educating the people who are running them. Because whenever we talk about the political societies in Bahrain, for example, the moment I start talking to people about their foundations or their manifesto, they don't have a proper understanding of what it is. And you can see that answering your question, you can see that through the votes of these parties under the umbrella of the parliament, for example. You see the Islamist, the leftist, and the independent all voting for the same reasons, which means they don't have any identity that separates them from one another. So, in my point of view, we need to educate and re-educate today because we still have people who believe in the pan-Arab nationalism from the 50s and the 60s that with what happened in Syria, basically, it was the last fort standing when it comes to that. So we do need to re-educate when it comes to that.
Thank you both. I believe we have no questions so far, but I'd like to ask if you have any additional comments on the topic or any points you'd like to make before we wrap up.
I have a small note. The change that happened in Europe with the European Union, yes, there were leaders who led the change to create such a formation as big as the European Union. But these leaders came from within the people. So it was just like Dr. Omar and Dr. Bianco mentioned earlier, that intellectuality came from within the people. So professors, educators, merchants, people with interest all gathered over the years, of course, in different forms, just to push for that because they saw their benefit is in that unity. We're here, just like I just spoke about, for example, the political and civil society formations, or Dr. Bianco mentioned the private sector. We still don't have that. Our governments are pushing for it. Our governments are building it. Our governments are doing it. But when it comes to the average man and woman on the streets, even the intellectual ones, I don't see a big movement when it comes to that. So we have a missing faction when it comes to building something that's really going to work, something that's really viable, something that will function properly, because it's the people who are going to make it work, not just the governments alone.
Right, the foundation as an enabler for this. Yes. Dr. Bianco or Dr. Umar, any points?
Very, very well said, Dr. Ahmed. I think you ended up on a great note. I still would like to draw your attention back to some sort of closing points about the comparison between Europe and the Middle East, which is that I've strongly encouraged always when I come across this idea, I strongly encourage the people to think in terms of how to adapt and to sort of steal some elements that could then work in the specific context. Because again, we have, even from a strictly sort of geographic point of view, we have within the European Union now 27 countries that are certainly different among one another. They have, as Dr. Ahmed was saying, different sort of cultural backgrounds, different languages. Have the same language, and therefore you can refer back to a similar or the same historical cultural background, which can be an asset, but can also become a source of friction. And so really the idea is to think about what specific elements can be useful, and by all means to sort of embrace them. For example, and I would end here on this sort of positive note, I think, the customs union that exists within the GCC, and although, it is oscillating, so sometimes there's still some frictions, but the fact that it has been adopted at the GCC level, which again was the result of many things, but also a result of a strategic dialogue between the European Union and the GCC, I think it was a successful example of something that worked in the context of the European Union and could work also in a different regional context. And so it was embraced and adapted, and I think, overall has been successful.
Thank you both for the answers. We actually have a question from an audience member, Henrietta, which asks, what are some lessons learned from the mistakes and challenges of the European integration project that the Gulf could or should avoid? You're referring here to GCC. How about the rest of the regional members? So Iraq, Yemen, Iran, so on.
Go ahead, doctor, go ahead.
In terms of what has not worked, inside of the European Union, I think the most glaring example is to have a currency union without having a fiscal union. So that's, the most glaring example of what hasn't worked. And it's something that we're still sort of struggling with. So that is the first thing that I think everybody should think about when they sort of look at the EU model. And in the regional context, that, for example, if you look only at the GCC, I think that could easily be done well, in the sense that you could have a currency union with also a fiscal union, because there is a basic level of uniformity with, now that there's been a number of reforms introduced, there is some basic level of uniformity across the GCC countries in terms of fiscal regimes. If you then expand it to Iraq and Yemen, then you start sort of having the first obstacles in many senses, including in this one.
I'll follow up on the second part of the question, since it's my forte. The GCC as a formation, basically it's an entity that was formed between countries who see eye to eye on almost everything. Yemen and Iraq engaged in talks over the past 15 years, as I recall, to join in different forms, of course, especially after the Arab Spring. They were invited, and then basically the only fruit that came out of it was them joining the GCC Cup. The rest of it did not proceed for many reasons. In order for you to engage, and here now, and this I'll include Iran. First of all, in Yemen, who are we talking to? Who is the government, and who's representing the people? There isn't any per se. It's not that easy, basically, to say Yemen, because now people started talking about the split of Yemen again and again. When we talk about Iraq, who calls the shots in Iraq? Besides, if Iraq or Yemen joins the GCC today, it will be like when lesser countries joined the EU. The obligations from the other EU countries were massive to fund and bring these countries back to life somehow. So with these two countries, they have nothing to offer today. What they will do, they'll come in as a burden with nothing to offer, especially when it comes to political. We touched on it earlier. When it comes to the proxies, they're governed by proxies somehow. Depend on how you look at it, but that's how I look at it. If they're governed by proxies, these proxies are anti-Gulf monarchies. So how can we work together? It's almost impossible. So these 2 points prevent us from working with them. When it comes to Iran, that's a complete different chapter. With Iran, when it comes to, for example, the proxies, they are the actor behind these proxies. So how can I engage with them if they don't want to engage in talks, in serious talks, to end all these issues? That's number one. Their GDP is basically leveling up to the Gulf combined. So in order for them to join, again, what are they offering on the table? With the currency being basically under the bus, with the economy is being rubbled, and most importantly, they can't, as per them, sustain their own capital today. So in order for them to join, can you imagine everything that the Gulf produce today will be directed into the Iranian economy in order for that to work out? But what are we going to get from Iran? I'm not saying they have nothing to offer. They may do. But is it leveling up? Today, it's not something that basically that levels up number-wise. Later on, I would love for that to happen personally, but I don't see it happening under today's circumstances.
Thank you both, Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Bianco, Dr. Imar. Any final remarks or notes before we wrap up? Audience members, if not, then thank you all for your time today. Thank you for our distinguished panelists for your insightful and thoughtful remarks. And I believe the recording will be available of the webinar on the website, or will go out to those who are interested. Thank you all so much. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.